Does sex control everything that we do in this world? Are men and women equal? Did feminism kill all the real men? Is monogamy just a big, huge mistake? Will AI destroy humanity? Is Trump a fleeting phenomenon? All this and much more on today's episode of the AJ Steele Show. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the AJ Steele Show. Today's episode features a very interesting gentleman I've met and befriended online. He's a professor of literature and philosophy. He teaches in universities and prisons, and yes, he even bartends on the weekends whenever the mood strikes him and he feels like pretending to be a young ruffian again. But most important, he is a devoted father, grandfather, husband, and a devout man of religion. But if you assume that we're going to talk about godliness and righteousness and what it's like to hang out with the grandkids in a park on a weekend, you're sorely mistaken. On today's episode, we're going to talk about sex and women and feminism, and we may even say a few things about women that will get you riled up, and we may even touch on some sore points as they relate to today's men, if you can still call them men. You know, a few years back, more than a few years back, when I was a young college student in San Francisco State University, I had the pleasure of meeting a lot of young ladies who really liked the company of masculine men. Yet all they did amongst themselves was bash them. And that's when I realized that many Western women, specifically Western women, have a weird duality or a type of a schizophrenia. They want to be in charge. They want to wear the pants. They want to be the breadwinners, and they claim that they want men to be emasculated weaklings who follow their every whim. But at the same time, they have zero respect for these effeminate, ballless men. They actually loathe them. They don't like them. They break them down and then they hate them. In reality, all these dragon ladies, these women, they're actually attracted to virile alpha cavemen whom they badmouth nonstop. But in many ways, they already won. As far as I can see, Western feminism defeated real men, and very few of us remain out in the open. What happened to all of these masculine males? Did they all die in the wars? Did chemicals in the water and the air reduce their testosterone levels? Or maybe it was those same feminists, these very same feminists who spiritually castrated them for good. This show may piss you off, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. You can't start a fire without a little friction. And far too many folks in America only care to hear what they like. They never venture out of their respective bubble to listen to truths out there that may not fit their narrative. And when I'm talking about these insular, closed-minded folks, I'm not just referring to the psychotics on the left. I'm actually pointing my finger at you, my fellow conservatives. There's nothing wrong with questioning the value of feminism or homosexuality or their role in the workplace or in the family hierarchy or in the destruction of modern society any more than there's anything wrong with judging the failings of men. By the same token, there's nothing wrong with questioning the intentions of conservative deities like Elon Musk or some of your favorite so-called conservative media figures. Isn't this exactly what an iconoclast like President Trump has done all his life? By taking down institutions and defying all the norms? Look, I've always admired men and women who march to their own beat, regardless of the consequence. And in many ways, my guest, Professor Borse, exemplifies those type of men, warts and all. Many years ago, I was a young man with a rock band, and I decided to quit college for a semester and go on tour and play shows all over Europe. I knew that college was important, but I also knew that some opportunities only come once in a lifetime. So I ended up inviting my best friend, who at the time was a pre-med student, to come along with us and help us out and enjoy all the spoils that the rock and roll lifestyle had to offer to a young man of 20. But on the eve of our departure, he gave me a card. Back then, we weren't exactly too enamored with email and we didn't have social media yet. Anyway, on the card that he wrote, it said that he can't go. He said that it would be his dream come true to go to Europe, but he had to stay in school. He also told me how much he admired my decision to live my life the way I chose. And he included a Robert Frost poem in the card, which I still kept 35 years later. And by the way, that friend is now a world famous physician, and he's still my best friend. And this is the poem. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for the passing there, had warned them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted I would ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. And that has made all the difference. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your continued listenership and your friendship. I'm going to take a short break now, and when we get back, you'll hear my interview with Professor Gregory Borse, another man who chose the road less traveled. I am AJ Steele, and this is the AJ Steele Show. Professor Gregory Borse, welcome back to our show. I hear you've been very busy lately, moving out there in the woods of Arkansas. Are you channeling Henry David Thoreau?
A little bit. And this week, I think you might have seen on X that I broke down and bought my very first pair of cowboy boots for my whole life.
Howdy! Wow.
Yeah, and so I'm learning to walk around in them. And my kids kind of tease me, but yeah, my wife and I we downsized. My youngest daughter just went to college.
Nice.
And we realized we were living in a little bit too much of house, and we were lucky enough to find a cabin on about 108 acres with a stocked lake and a lake house and a shooting range, and it was cheaper. And
Really?
So we said, yeah, my bride looked at it. I thought, ooh, I don't know if she's going to go for this. And she was like, yeah, I can make this work. So we literally live in a one-room house, and it's not crowded. It's really comfortable. We're making fires every night.
How nice.
And we're loving it. So yeah, I have been quite busy.
Well, congratulations. I have a little
you.
cabin up in the Northern California mountains with 10 acres. No lake, unfortunately, but we do go shooting and have fun there, on the weekends here and there.
Yeah.
Now, philosophy class and books and cabins apart, I wanted today's show to be about women, also known as the fairer sex. As you know, the AJ Steele Show prides itself as being all about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. No.
Yeah.
Actually, our motto is politics, money, sex, and everything in between. And I can't tell you how many people keep bugging me, and they keep saying, look, I talk about politics, I talk about money all the time, but when are we going to talk about sex? So here's my first question to you, and I want to start at the very beginning. I know that Sigmund Freud is out of vogue these days because of his politically incorrect views about homosexuals. But I'm a huge Freudian. I really believe in his theories, and I think that everything that we human beings do is driven by our sexual nature, which is ingrained into our genetics for the sole purpose of making babies and procreating.
Right.
Now, I know that you're a devout Catholic, and I don't want to get into this big conversation about creationism and theology, but you're a sexual human being. At least that's my sense. You have plenty of kids. You seem to really love women, as I do. Do you agree that everything that we human beings do is driven by the need for sex and by extension, the impulse to procreate?
Well, I would agree that it is foundational for sure. And it's built in at the biological level. I don't agree with everything that how Freud framed everything in his theory, but I don't think he was wrong, and I don't think the world is wrong in thinking that Freud's insights are pivotal to human behavior, at the individual level and at the special level. I do find it interesting that Freudian theory has been sort of co-opted in the culture to make arguments for certain kinds of behaviors that wouldn't go along with what is going to help the species survive in the long run. And I also really kind of hate the way the feminists have mangled it in all of the waves well, maybe not the earliest wave of feminism, from the vote out of the abolition of slavery, but after you get that mid 20th century first wave, second wave, third wave, maybe fourth wave feminism, I was watching it and I was like, I really, this whole movement looks like it was invented by a man, for sure. And it always struck me that way. But you know how academia is. You have to keep your lips buttoned, keep your head down, to make sure that you get through the program. And a lot of people ask me about that because I am a devout Catholic, and my first 2 degrees were from a Catholic liberal arts school, and then I went to a big state university, and I tell people the same thing every time. I said, look, I wanted to learn Marxism from Marxists. I wanted to learn feminism from feminists. I wanted to learn from those who really believed. Because if all I ever do is argue with it, then I'm not going to come to understand it. So I was really blessed in my time at LSU in that way. They didn't turn me, but at least I feel like I got an insider's view.
But I guess I'm trying to get more raw from you. Do you believe there's anything that we do as human beings that is separated from our need for sex?
Well, the other drive, has to do with death. So I think they're rivals. They're rivals, and then they're the flip side of the same coin, right? The urge to procreate is also a counter to the inevitability of death. So the two drives go hand in hand. Freud knew that too. So I would say no, probably not. In the rawest sense of in the rawest sense.
So if we remove sex from who we are, my drive, your drive, every normal man and woman's drive, what is there left? Are we just animals?
Well, I mean, if we were pure sex drive, I would probably argue that we were. But there is a spiritual component to human beings that goes beyond the mere animal desires that are built in and already fully developed when we're conceived. The way Thomas Aquinas puts it, and I like it the way he says this. He says we shouldn't think of ourselves as souls in bodies. We should think of ourselves as bodies in souls. So all of the things that you've said about the sex drive, the death, or the avoidance of death, or our drive to procreate are built into us. Notice this about us. From the moment of conception, everything that's associated with the body is already, and the will is already 100 fully developed. Does not need to learn anything. It wants what it wants, right? The intellect, however, takes some time to catch up, right? And so when I'm teaching my medieval philosophy, I'll point out, I'll say, look, the way Aquinas accounts for, and this is going to connect, accounts for evil in the world is that we live in a good universe and the desire of the body is for the good. But the body has a hard time distinguishing between the greater good and the lesser good, the one that is more immediate, the one that is right in front of us, the one that is going to satisfy what I want right now. And it's the job of the spirit or the intellect to make that distinction, so that higher part of us does not simply act out of animal desire. And that goes all the way back to Aquinas' reading of Aristotle, because Aristotle said, well, certainly human beings cannot merely act upon their desires because that makes them no more than pigs. And we obviously, a very brief examination of the human composite being, as Aquinas would call it, shows us that we are much, much more than that.
Well, I will posit that we are pigs, actually. You know, the Jewish tradition, we are. I consider us to be animals with a sense of superiority. Um,
Right,
the Jewish belief is that we are all born with good and bad in us, and life is a constant struggle. The evil side, the good side, and it's
right,
all about choice. I don't know if we truly have a choice, but that's the Jewish belief. In other words,
right,
there's good and bad, and we're born with all of them. There's no original sin, there's no this and that. It's our
right.
choice whether we let our animal nature win out or our human nature. Now, in a related question, primates are not monogamous. There's an
Right,
alpha male ape who gets to have sex with all the female apes, and they're totally fine with it because it
right,
leads to the biggest, strongest, smartest offspring. Do
right.
you believe that it's in the nature of men? And I know this is a tough question because you're a married man for many years. So am I, by the way.
Yes,
Uh, do you believe that it's in the nature of men, specifically men, and maybe even women, to be monogamous, or is it some kind of a religious construct that happens to be in direct competition with our true urges?
I would split the baby on this one, so to speak.
Hey,
I think that men are not necessarily built for monogamy. Now, that is in no way to make any sort of moral argument that men should not be monogamous once they have made that promise. Okay.
mhm,
But I do believe that women are built to be monogamous.
interesting.
And that has to do with their biology. Think about it this way: when we were existing on the planet as hunter gatherers, the birth rate and the family size and the village community size was very much smaller than after we domesticated the seed in the animal. Hunter gatherer women would not let their men have at them if they had a nursing baby until that baby could keep up with the tribe, i.e., so they would have one child maybe every 4 or 5 years. Farming women, on the other hand, didn't have to move. They could produce more food than they needed, and therefore the reason hunter gatherers so quickly uh, drop out of sight after the domestication of the seed in the animal all over the world is because of the women. Because you can imagine the hunter gatherer women looking at a farm and slapping their male partner on the arm, saying, "You need to learn how to do that because I'm tired of this," right? Um, so it seems to me that when you look at the biology of the female body, gestation takes so long. She's so vulnerable during that time that her biological interest is in coupling with a man who is interested in sticking around and providing for her. And so it is not advantageous for women, and we see this in postmodern society right now. It is not advantageous for women to have many partners and children by many different men because it confuses who is ultimately responsible for providing for those children, and it's decimating to the foundation for a well-ordered society, in my view.
And yet, what does that say about men? Is it advantageous for us to have just one partner?
I think it is, but I will say this: I think that men. So if you look at sort of an ancient Greek map of the way there are different laws for different levels of reality, right? The law of the household is the oikos, just like the yogurt, and that's a feminine principle. And then right outside the oikos, the family, that doesn't mean that the man isn't head of the family. I'm not saying that in practice. What I'm saying is that the law of the household is female. And anybody who grew up in a family knows who actually rules the household. It's not the dad. The dad likes to think that he's in charge of things, but as you know, mom is the one that's running things
Absolutely.
at that very basic. It took me a while. 5 kids, right? I think about kid number 4, I finally learned, no, go ask your mom.
True.
The answer is whatever she gives you. I'm agreeing with her. I'm not getting in trouble for you guys anymore. Because they had learned early on, hey, if we ask dad, you know, he's not going to think about it. And he's going to be like, yeah, sure. But right outside the oikos is the polis. And the polis is male. And again, now we start thinking about that. Which model, civilizational model, is the one that works better materially for the society? Is it a polygamous one where men have many wives and produce many, many, many children? Or is it the monogamous one? I would argue that history shows us that monogamy is superior, at least in producing societies that are more stable.
Well, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, especially in the modern world, as
Yeah,
you've pointed out, I agree that a monogamous relationship is a logical adaptation. It's almost a necessity for our survival as a
right.
species. But I don't think that we were made this way. If we were, we wouldn't be attracted to every beautiful woman we see, right?
Which brings me to my second point. What this points out. So if you think of the Odyssey, right? The Iliad is about the death of the warrior culture, right? The demise, the end of it. It's a very sad poem in that sense. Um, the Odyssey, on the other hand, is about the paradigm shift from one civilizational model to the other. And there's one way you can think about why Odysseus has to go through everything that he went through. Think about what he did and all of the other great warriors of Greek culture did in the Iliad. They dropped everything, kings though they were, husbands though they were, fathers though they were, and launched 1,000 ships to save one man's wife. Okay. Now, in warrior culture, you can understand why they had to do that. We can't let the Trojans get away with kidnapping one woman from any of us. Otherwise, they will think they can get away with anything against us, right? But when Agamemnon returns home, Clytemnestra kills him with an axe. He sacrificed his daughter to make the trip to Troy for 10 years. So the Odyssey, through one lens, you could look at it and say, ask yourself, what is it that Odysseus needs to learn before he is reunited with his home and with his bride, right? My reading is that the gods needed him to learn that he got his roles mixed up. He thought of himself as a king first, a husband second, and a father third. And what he needs to be restored to is his role as the husband. He cannot be reunited with the wise Penelope until he's recognized that that is his first promise. The second promise is to his son, Telemachus, who he abandoned and who never knew his father. A very dangerous situation for that boy to have been in his whole life. And we see that at the very beginning of the poem where Athena takes Telemachus aside and says, you must go out and do some feats so that you can get some followers. And so the way I think of it is that this is part and parcel of that adaptation that the female principle at the root of the oikos demands of the male who flourishes out in the polis, in order to make sure that the foundation for everything is stable. Anyway, that's my read. I'm glad you asked the question because it conveniently lets me talk about Homer.
Well, I find it very interesting that as a Catholic, of course, you're a philosophy professor, so I understand the Greek, the Greco-Roman interest. But I find it very interesting because I've done a lot of studying about the Catholic religion and the influence of the Roman, and of course, Roman is Greco on some
Right,
level. So it's really interesting that you're going back to that versus the Bible. I find that very interesting. But let's get back to the conversation. We're talking about monogamy. We're talking about the normal relationship between a man and a woman, the sexual
right.
tension, the procreation. How do you explain that there's so many young people today choosing not to date or marry? Nietzsche proclaimed that God is dead. Can A.J.
Right.
Steele say that sex is dead? Did technology find a way to subvert human nature by mind control and maybe drugs or drinking? I don't know.
Well, I think I would call it, in fact, I haven't written the book, but I should write the book. I want to call it The Great Disorientation. And it does have to do with technology. But let me tell you a little anecdote. So when I was in grad school, as you know, this is probably the reason that we met and became friends, because I sent you that little thumbnail and said, well, I'm the only guy that you'll ever meet that was a PhD candidate, principal of a private Catholic school, and a bartender at the same time.
Absolutely.
And for your watchers and listeners, I was like Clark Kent. I'd put on the Clark Kent suit during the day, and then I'd disrobe on the way back from school. My wife would spit me out of the van, and I'd bartend until 11 o'clock at night.
And you're very humble as well, I must add. You forgot that.
But during that time, I was bartending with a bunch of undergraduates at LSU. And we were in one of the most popular bars in Baton Rouge. It was a place where everybody came and got their big meal before they went and partied. I don't know if folks know this, but there's something in the water down in Baton Rouge. There is an inordinate amount of absolutely drop dead gorgeous girls in that part of the country.
I've been there. I've been there a few times.
You know what I mean? It's silly. And I'm sitting there. So my bar, it was a bunch of guys. Well, I can show you. Hang on a second.
I was thrown out of a strip club when I was 18 in Louisiana
So
because
if you
there
guys
you
can
go.
see this, so that's me when I was young and sorry, a few years before I got to LSU and started my PhD. Just a couple of years, maybe two,
Wow, great
three.
photo.
So I look like this, not like this, right?
You look just
Working in the
fine
bar.
now.
Yeah. And that's my eldest daughter, Elizabeth, in that picture with me. In fact, that picture was taken the very same week that I did the taping for the Barbara Walters show at my house in Dallas.
Wow.
My,
Did she make
my
you cry? Because I'm not going to make you cry.
She did not make me cry.
No,
She
there
did
you
make
go.
one of the other panelists cry, and
There you go.
we all kind of joked about it because it was the guy that we didn't expect.
Interesting.
Um,
So
but
I mean, let's
anyway,
get back to this. How do you
no.
explain? Go
Yeah.
ahead. Go ahead.
So I think this anecdote fits what we're talking about here. So in my bar, we had a resident, Matthew McConaughey. This kid,
My
drop dead
wife's
gorgeous.
favorite, by the way.
Right, drop dead gorgeous,
Oh yeah.
dimples that go forever.
Mm.
Girls walk into the restaurant, they see Enoch behind the bar, and they're like, "Who's that?" And they'd always be warned. They're like, "Stay away from that guy. He's a dog." Right.
Really?
And one night, Britney Spears walked into the restaurant, and I said, "That's Britney Spears." She wasn't all done up or anything. She's from nearby Kenner,
Oh,
and nobody would believe me. And then the next day, they were all like, "Hey, did you hear Britney Spears was in here last night?" I was like, "Yeah." I mean, but anyway, Enoch, these beautiful girls walk in, and he looks at me and he says, "You know, I know you're married. I know you have. At the time, I had 4 children." And he said, "But you can't tell me that you don't look at that when they walk in here." And I said, "No, I actually don't."
oh really?
Right. And he said, "What is it? Is it that you're married?" I said, "Oh no, that does not do it." I said, "But there are two things. One, I have daughters. And as soon as I had my first daughter, it shifted the way that I looked at women. And I realized it. I was like, wow, yeah.
Hmm.
Every woman that I meet is somebody's sister, is somebody's daughter, and so it just changed my perspective. So it's not that I don't recognize the attractiveness of women, and as I get older, I start noticing that women are becoming more and more and more attractive.
Absolutely.
But because, as I say on X and everywhere else, I'm a promise keeper. Those things are paramount to me, and that's that part of that spiritual side of us, which is that counterbalance to our sexual drive. But there was something else I said to Enoch, and it was half joking. I said, "But there's something else I know that you don't know." And he said, "What's that?" I said, "My boys can swim." He said, "What do you mean?" I was like, "I can impregnate my wife from the long end of an Olympic-sized pool." I said, "You're not sure that your boys can swim, so you got to spread them around." And he just said, "Oh, shut up, man." But the other thing I noticed at the time too is that we were going through a sea change, and this touches on the other part of your question. Um, I was in the kitchen one night at this bar restaurant, and the girls were all complaining about what dogs boys are. And I looked at them and I said, "Ladies," and I was the resident uncle, right? I'm older, I'm married, I'm not chasing skirts. They know they can trust me. They
Yes.
loved it when I worked. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I'm not a lech. And I said, "Ladies," and they said, "They say anything to get in your pants, blah 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 blah," right? And I said, "Y'all could change men's behavior like in a heartbeat." And I realized that at the time it was because we'd had a demographic shift. More girls went to LSU than boys.
Hmm.
And I said, and I used to tease the guys that I work with. I said, "Y'all are a bunch of girls." I said, when I was younger, we had to chase girls. I was like, "But y'all get to be the girls now. You shave your arms, you get yourself all primped, you show up to the party late because you know there are going to be 4 or 5 of them that are coming after you." And they'd be like, "Shut up. No, we're not." And I'm like, "Oh, yes, you are." I said, "You are different than Gen Xers." And but I said to the girls, I said, "Lysistrata." He said, "What's Lysistrata?" I said, "Ancient Greek play. The women get fed up with men's behavior, and so they ban sex until the men shape up. And guess what? If you'd stop giving away your cookies, they would change."
So how do you explain the explosion of homosexuality and transsexualism in that context?
Well, I think that is partly driven by technology. I think it has made a kind of exposure to certain. Look, you and I both know that these behaviors are not new. right? They have transcended from the beginning of. I mean, Tiresias. There's one myth that has Tiresias, the blind seer, was punished for some offense against the gods by being turned into a woman. And then he's transformed back into a man. And this is partly what gives him his wisdom. He's the only one that knows what it's like to be. So these are not new ideas, right? But I think that social media and computer technology has divorced us in a way from our own bodies. So think about this. Aristotle said that you can't violate the non-contradiction principle, right? Two things can't be in one space at the same time, and one thing can't be in two different places at one time. But the internet makes it possible. And people have heard me talk about this in other contexts. When you look at the progress of technology, up until and through the Industrial Revolution, all of our technological process is an extension of our musculoskeletal system. And by the way, this is Donald Cowan. I got it from a book called Unbinding Prometheus. He was one of my mentors. But the technological revolution is an extension of our nervous system, right? So it makes it possible for me and you in real time, thousands of miles away from each other, to see and hear. That changes whether I can be in two places at one time, which right now I am, right? But this is why I call it the great disorientation. I think that the explosion in what you and I would call degradation, perversion, or whatever you want to call it. And I don't want to be moralistic about it. I understand it. I speak of these things diagnostically. I think part of it is our increasingly becoming detached from being in our own body. So to counter Aquinas, we are composite beings, but when we extend ourselves beyond the borders of our own bodies, I think we almost become like those autistic people that will have these episodes where they're not in their bodies. And I think it explains this craving for a reassociation with that, and that ends up being expressed in extreme ways. Does that make sense?
Yes and no. So, I mean, you're
Okay.
talking about nervous system being controlled by media or social media, whatever. And you're also talking about soul. And originally, when we started this conversation, we started talking about genetics and
Right,
human needs, sexual needs.
right, right.
How does one suppress the other or supplement the other for that matter? I mean, how
Well,
does that happen?
think of it this way. If Plato is partially right that our experience of reality is as a prisoner chained to a wall that can only see the distortions, the shadows, and the reflections of what's real, then wouldn't you and I agree that our participation in social media is a participation in a mirror world, in a world that masquerades and that the body responds to as if it is real, but which is not actually real? It's an
Oh,
artifice.
absolutely, absolutely. And I was going to ask you a question about social media, and I might
Yeah,
later on. I agree. It's not real.
yeah,
It's a construct, but I have
right,
not personally, I've not lost connection with my everyday friends or my everyday wife, Mrs. Steele, or my
right,
children. I'm
right.
still in reality. Are you saying that the new generation is not grounded in reality or in
I think
physicality?
I think up to a point that is true. But what's interesting is that human beings are extraordinarily sensitive and extraordinarily intelligent beings. And it only takes a couple of generations for these things to kind of run their course. So, for instance, when my younger son, the former Marine, soon to be a Marine again, I believe,
Oh, really? Wow.
we just had a
Congratulations.
conversation about that. He's flipping a coin between the Air Force and going back in
Wow.
to the Marines.
Wow.
But I asked him when he was like in middle school if he was on any of the social media things, and he was like, "Heck no." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Why would I want some girl in the cafeteria knowing whether I like, I don't know, pineapple on my pizza or not?" He just thought it was ridiculous. And at the moment, and this is why I pay attention to this stuff, I said, "Oh, okay, so that means Facebook is over. It's done." And of course, flash forward 10, 12 years, right?
Of course.
And Facebook is reserved for pictures of unicorns, puppies,
And
and
old people,
grandchildren.
basically, at this
It's
point.
the old people place.
Yes.
And so I got banned for life because I don't act like an old person. I don't think respectably. Um, and going back to the artifice of social media, part of my persona on X, you joked earlier that I'm so humble, um, is that all of it is an artifice. All of it is vanity, right?
Of course,
And
it's
for people
vanity.
and for people to pretend that it's something other than that, I find in one way kind of laughable. And so the persona that I project on X is it's kind of meta, pun intended. It's the
Yeah.
meta me.
Well, absolutely. Again, before we get into heavier topics, which will make some of my sensitive male listeners cringe, and some more of my militant female listeners want to kill me, I have a very important question for you.
Sure.
What the heck happened with this little Rachel Zegler in the Snow White movie debacle?
Oh my goodness. Well, again, it's culture is always downhill from downstream from politics, right? And so I think it is part and parcel of a sort of generalized backlash at the leading edge of wokeism. And people have gotten to the point. It's like Trump's victory. People have gotten to the point where they're just kind of done with it. And even, I think I put up last night, maybe in answer to something that you had posted, a little clip from the movie Lost in Space from 1998, where Will Robinson says, "Ooh, they eat their own wounded."
Mm,
And I've always said that, you cannot fool reality forever.
mm.
And what happens to these kinds of movements is that they end up beginning to eat their own wounded. And what's happened to this actress, we all agree that she's allowed to free speech. She can hold her opinions about Palestine or Israel or anything that she wants.
Or
But there
Trump
is a
supporters for that matter, which she
right.
said
But
should never have peace, I
and
believe.
again, but when you're in the business of entertainment, why would you want to alienate half of your market right out of the gate?
There's no question about that, but the fact
Right.
that she was allowed to do this is the main issue in my mind,
Right.
and the fact that she
Right.
felt so comfortable in doing this.
Yes. And I think again, it's what happens when we silo ourselves off and we exist in a bubble, and that bubble is nothing but a self-validating bubble that substitute itself for actual reality. And this is not new either. You remember when Nixon won the presidency, there was that liberal in Manhattan that said, "But I don't know anybody who voted for him." Well,
Yeah,
you
well,
know what
well,
I
I
mean?
guess, I guess you could call it the pendulum has swung, maybe,
Yeah.
perhaps, but hopefully this will also the pendulum will swing as far as the homosexuality and the transgenderism, this whole mentality that the man and the woman are some kind of a relic of the past.
Right. Um, but I also think that it has to do with the confusion that's been sown by feminism
And we'll
about
get to
what the
that in a second.
yes, about what has happened, what the proper role of women in society is. And I
Mm,
think that there have been some. I mean, if you look at all of it as kind of a smorgasbord of preferences, they don't they contradict each other all over the place. And so in the 1990s, when I started hearing my theoretical professors and colleagues, a word sort of infected their vocabulary in the 1990s, and it was this word intersection. And I
mm.
started picking up on it, like in classes and stuff. And I was like, what is this? And then okay, so the rock star on in the world of feminism back then was Camille Paglia, who wrote a book called Sexual Personae. And this is part of the foundational works that began a certain type of thinking. Well, where is Camille Paglia in the pantheon of feminism? She might as well be J.K. Rowling.
Where's Gloria Steinem these days?
Exactly. But what I'm saying is that she got totally, canceled
Sure.
by a movement that absolutely championed her up through the 90s. But then she started saying some very, very sensible things about Governor Palin of Alaska, saying, "Why are the feminists jumping on this woman? She is a poster child for what women should want. She's had her cake and she's eating it too. She has a beautiful family life. She's active in politics.
Yep.
She's been very successful, and feminism is dumping all over her." And at that point, Camille Paglia is out.
Well,
Um,
I think that logic is the enemy of leftism. Let's go a little deeper. Men and women, are they equals?
They are equal in their likeness and image of God,
Okay.
but they are not the same. And I think to treat them as if they're interchangeable is extraordinarily damaging to the psyche and is damaging to society altogether. I think women have been sold a bill of goods by feminism, for sure.
So did feminism destroy the world in your opinion? And you can elaborate on that a little bit.
not the second or third world, but it certainly has damaged the first, um, because it has sold women the idea that to deny one of the roots of their biological identity is their weakness, when
Mm,
in fact it is their strength. Um, there's a beautiful moment in William Faulkner's Light in August where a male character overhears a woman giving birth. And my son just had his first child. My wife and I were lucky enough to be there. It was a home birth.
congratulations.
Thank
Wow.
you. And I've been to my own children's birth, but they were all in hospitals.
True.
And this was a home birth, and I got to hear the birth from the next room over.
Wow.
And it reminded me of this moment in Faulkner where this male character says that the sound that he hears at the moment that the baby was born was dark and threatful, and it disturbs his very sense of his own self.
Mm.
And so, in contemplating what is dark and threatful about the female body, and I do this in my film class too, and I won't make this too long, but the danger that women represent to men is that they can steal our seed, and then they secretly and magically turn it into something that we can't control.
Well, it depends how involved we are
Well, that's
as
true, but
fathers,
but
right?
but what Faulkner points out in Light and August is that if men were in charge of making reality, we would simply make duplicates of ourselves. But female nature refuses to allow that. And so this character is shocked when this woman has a baby and the baby is not identical to her. It is
Mm,
completely different. And
interesting.
he realizes that he has misunderstood something about the female, um, the female role in reproducing or co-creating nature and the reality that we occupy. If it were up to us, you and I, we're perfect. I would just like make little mini me's. You know what I mean? And the world would be great. But when we submit our seed to the female form, then she takes it and she makes something with it that is different. And that's fantastic. In fact, if you go rewatch the movie Psycho, and you'll see that Hitchcock is way ahead of his time, because that's exactly what Marion Crane's threat is to the male world, is that she will take his substitute for seed, which is money, and steal it and then do something with it that he can't control.
But let me ask you for some more meat and potato
Sure.
answers. There's a movement right now amongst women, interestingly. They believe that women shouldn't have the right to vote. Now, I don't want to piss off my listeners, and most of which are women anyway, and we kind of pissed them off already. But was it a mistake to give women the right to vote, a right that bestows an incredible power to destroy? Did we literally open Pandora's box?
Maybe we did. It may be, and this is G.K. Chesterton. He said women already have the right to vote. Women rule by thumb, men rule by the vote.
Hmm.
I don't disagree with allowing women to vote. I don't agree. I mean, I don't disagree with their being given full voice, in the
Hmm.
political realm through the vote. Um, what I think has poisoned it is that they have been convinced that those things that make them the most valuable and the most powerful beings are actually their weaknesses. And
That's
so they were sold a bill of goods that said, unless you can function in society the way a man functions in society, then you
Mhm.
have no value to society. That's where I think that even their vote has been perverted.
And I think that's a key. I absolutely agree, and I'm happy that you touched on it. But the question is, what has this done to men by extension? Because women, they're the ones with the balls these days. And again, I've been married for over 30 years. I have four
Yeah,
kids, much like you.
yeah,
You have five. But, so I respect women. I have three daughters.
right,
I have a wife, a lovely wife. And you know what? She makes me think that I'm the boss at home, but I'm not the boss. We all
right,
know that we're not the boss, okay?
right,
We just get to talk, we get to act like we're macho, but we're not the boss. Women,
right.
always get their way one way or another.
Right.
So I'm not at all, reducing their role or their power. But as a guy who's ran huge hospital chains and stuff like that, I can tell you, women are not as good leaders as men. Women are better nurses. They're better doctors. They're obviously better parents in most cases, but
Yes.
they are not equal in the sense of, like you said. I mean, we're equal on a human level, but we're not equal as far as our skills and our feelings.
Yeah. Even what I would call graces.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we can't live without women. So this is not some kind of a woman bashing interview here, but
Right.
I don't believe that they are capable of doing all the things that we are. Leadership to me is a problem in most cases, and of course, you'll bring up Golda Meir and Indira Gandhi and
Right.
Thatcher. Yes, but
Thatcher.
absolutely right. I mean, that's the three go-tos. But as far
They're
as
the
I'm
except.
concerned,
They're the exceptions that prove the rule.
well, that's exactly it. So I don't think women are as well equipped to certain tasks that we men are, and yet because of feminism we have subsided. Men have we've taken a back seat. Is
Right.
it
Well,
their
that's,
fault that men are so lazy and so unattached?
well, part of it is our material success. You notice that when you have a materially successful society like ancient Rome did, you are poised for the fall because everybody gets soft.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think that feminism is a part of that, but also that it's just that we're the victims of our own success. To touch upon the differences between the way men and women do things, I joked about this a few years ago with the wife of the chancellor of my own university when I was at lunch. She said, I don't understand how Jack does it. You know, he has all of these things that he has to command all day long. He comes home, he eats dinner, he has one toddy, he reads the newspaper, and he goes to bed. And she said, and I can't do that. I run everything through my head. You know what I mean? I've got an hour and a half before I can get to sleep. And I said, well, Judy, you don't understand. Men have more than one ass. And she said, what do you mean? I said, look, guys look at things and we decide whether we're going to put our whole ass into it, whether it's a half ass, quarter ass, or no ass. I said, that's why if AJ Steele and I were working on a car engine together and he started berating me and insulting me for what a dope I was for trying to fix this thing the way I was doing it and said, get out of the way, let me show you, I would be like, sure, give me your beer.
Mm.
And I just stand back. There'd be no insult. Wouldn't have my feelings hurt because that's the way we operate. But like you, I was a CEO of a private school, very small affair. And one day I realized I was the only man in the building.
Mm.
And it was when I learned that women, when they go to do something, or at least I didn't learn it, I articulated it to myself. They always do it 100%. They put themselves absolutely entirely into it.
Mm.
And so their response, their emotional and psychological response to criticism or disagreement is entirely different than it is because we simply don't commit ourselves that way.
Well,
We
we, we
reserve,
we could pick and choose. I agree, but so I
yeah,
have a lot of feminists in my family. My
yeah,
extended family, my sisters, family members, and all they do is complain about men. Men are lazy. Men don't want to commit. Men don't want to work. We have to do everything. I throw it back at them. I think that feminism has allowed us men to be lazy and worthless and detached. What do you think
yeah.
about that?
Well, I do think so, and I also think the rise of the metrosexual and beyond, which we're
Mm.
coming to the apotheosis of that now, back in the '90s, was sort of a cultural embracing of the idea of the toxicity of men, and we
Mm.
have a whole portion of men that have embraced, that oh, I guess they're right. I shouldn't be so domineering. I shouldn't be as aggressive as I am. I have simply said to myself, no, I'm not going to accept that. I think that is a wrong way to look at the world, and I think it feeds into something that it itself is more toxic to culture than whatever they want to call male toxicity. I mean, look, men are disposable. At the very biological level, we are built with our sexual organs on the outside. We produce millions more seed than we need to procreate. This is why we are the ones that should be fighting wars, because if you kill every last man on the planet except for one, you can save the planet, but you can't do it without women. Look at what nature does when there's drought. and natural disaster on the African savanna, in every species on the savanna, more females will be born than males. But when there's material success and there is plenty, more males will be born. And this is a special level way for us to see that when things are difficult from the outside in, the species thinks that it is under threat, it produces more girls. And since the advent of abortion in the first world, that's exactly what's happened to the human species, because it thinks it's under threat. So that's also a part of the rise of the woman in society, in positions of leadership, and the falling away or the decline of male.
Well, I think it's in some ways what you're saying rounds up to how we started this conversation with the one dominant male who impregnates all the women. Remember,
Yeah,
we spoke about that earlier.
yeah,
In some ways, that's what you're doing, is you're telling me that there's no need for so many men to be around necessarily, especially in
right,
times of when things are going well. Um, of course, I've never seen, or I haven't seen too many children who were born without a father around who
right,
do well in life. I don't think innovation would happen without men. And this is not some kind of a show about, oh, look, we men are great. I think women
right.
have a lot of issues. Um, but it's very interesting. The erasure of the masculine male, I think, is a horrible crime. And it's a
Yeah.
horrible sign of our times.
And
Um,
it
go ahead.
I was only going to add, I think that this speaks to I think you and I have a certain kind of homonoia, which means like-mindedness. We see the world the same way, and I think it probably accounts for our fast friendship once we met each other, because I think it's something that you and I are both trying to reclaim. And I'm doing it from a very odd space, from academia, which is not a male. I mean, there might be more men in academia for certain
Not
generations,
real
but
men. Not real
it's
men.
not exactly, it's not a male dominated um, field. And I'm, with my persona on social media and even in my functioning as a professor within a university system, I'm trying to reclaim it a little bit as a
Well,
happy warrior.
but you're
And
definitely an outlier. That's the thing. So, I mean, I guess
yeah,
it leads to my last question on this topic, and then we'll move on. How do we reclaim our manhood when everything is geared against us as men, as
I think
masculine men?
I think I think this goes to the great division that we're seeing exposed in the United States right now, and that is the divide between the makers and the takers,
Mm,
between the urbanites and the people who live in rural areas. I live in a very rural area where we don't have a paucity of male men,
mm,
men who are men, and women who love them and want them to be that way.
interesting.
Because these guys, they know how to do things. I joke, when the zombie apocalypse comes, thank heavens I'm in Arkansas, because I am surrounded by people who know how to do things. These will be the preservers of civilization when it collapses, not the great city people.
I
In
agree.
fact, those will be the zombies wandering into Arkansas with empty Starbucks coffee cups in their hands saying, hey, is there any chance you can help me out? And since we have all the guns, we're going to be like, get off of my lawn. Um, and they just don't see, the hedge fund managers just don't see far enough into the future to realize that their castle is completely built upon sand. And they've picked a war with the people that make their wealth and material success actually possible, which goes back to Zegler and her denigrating half of the market for Disney, and Disney realizing, wait, if we keep doing this, we're going out of business.
Well, I don't know
You
if Disney realized that, but they will realize it soon
they
enough.
will have to.
You know, it's interesting. So you live in Arkansas, and you're telling me about men, and I live in San Francisco. And let's not talk about the homosexuality, but I'm talking about the average urban kind of male. They're
Right,
the exact opposite of everything you described. Women here are the ones with the balls, you know. So I'm
right,
an outlier here, not in academia because I don't do that, but
right.
just as a human being who dares to express himself. Look, we covered a lot of women's issues, so let's do a quick lightning round of questions and short answers, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So I'll throw stuff at you, and you just whatever pops to your mind. What do you think of Trump's presidency so far?
I think it's colossally disruptive, and it's exactly what we need right now.
What's going on with our courts? And I don't trust the lower court judges, the lower district judges, to be fair, but I don't trust the Supreme Court either. What do you think is going on with the courts?
Generationally, this is what happened. Wokeness was invented in my area, literary theory. It leaked over into the law schools. 90% of people graduating from law schools and taking the bar are liberal. So that means that the pool for judges is tilted toward a progressive view of the law. And, we've introduced the idea that there are no essential truths. Everything's plastic. And so that is what's going on with the courts right now. It's not everywhere. But again, it's a generational thing.
I think you're too kind. I think they're actually corrupt and they're related to big money. Uh, but how do we change that? We keep complaining about academia, we keep complaining about the courts. How do we change these things?
I think you're starting to see it where you've got people at the grassroots level starting to show up at school board meetings saying, "I'm pulling my kids out of public school and taking them to private school. You've got to let them eat their wounded. They can't fool reality forever, so the bubble will ultimately pop."
Are we are,
Um,
are we headed to civil war? Is that what you're saying?
um, I sure hope not, but if we are, it's going to be a short one. Because I don't know if you've ever sat in a ballpark in the middle of rural Indiana and watched a girls softball game go on while a pee wee game over here, t-ball is going on over here, and the boys Babe Ruth League is going on over here, and then counted the number of Harley motorcycles. My brother and I were standing in Indiana one time, and he looked around and he said, "Man, I wouldn't want to go to war against Indiana." I was like, "Yeah, you wouldn't win." So if we do get into a civil war, the urbanites are going to find out just where the real blue areas of the countries are, and they were the ones that they were burning down in the last 8 years in the cities. They
And
weren't.
yet, and yet I hear a lot of tough guys on internet, guys like you and I. Oh, we have guns, we're tough, but and I'm not calling for any kind of violence, but what
No,
have
no,
we
no,
really
no.
done other than talk about the Second Amendment right? How have we asserted ourselves as men and as conservatives and as Americans and fathers, other than just yapping on Twitter?
Well, I think part of it is you cannot. We try. The conservative model used to be make yourself the lamp on the hill. And so all of the conservatives drifted out of public education. They drifted over to private education. And that model does not work to move the needle in culture, which is one of the reasons why I went into a big state system, because my idea was, no, I have to be a virus in the system
Hmm.
and an antidote to what is making it so corrupt and degraded and so misunderstand itself. Unless I'm here, they're not gonna. They're just gonna let me go over and be in my own bubble, and that's why I'm on X.
We do have very limited influence. Are we just
That's
basically whiners?
that. Maybe we are in a sense, but also we underestimate the kind of reach we have. And I've been paying attention to that because I didn't realize the other day I'm closing in on 5,000 followers,
Well, congratulations.
and that puts me in like the top 3% of X, which I had no idea.
Amazing.
And I told my son, he was like, "Dad, that's really impressive." And I was like, "Nah, I don't think so." But I make this point all the time. Taylor Swift does not have the power to move the needle in politics at all, because there's nothing that binds together her followers to each other except for Taylor Swift.
Hmm.
I think the kind of followers that you and I have are different. What binds them together is homonoia, is a way of seeing the world.
But is it just cultism? I mean, we have a little tiny,
Could be.
we're the David Koreshes of X.
Well, maybe. But you and I have a knack for not believing our own press at the same time. So
That's
so
true.
I can only hope. So I participate in these things because I think one of the mistakes academia has made is they don't participate with the culture, and too many students get to university, especially in places like where I live, and they realize, wait a minute, my professor's somebody that is really, really smart, and they got their undergraduate degree, went directly into a PhD program, and now they're teaching, and they've never done anything.
Hmm.
And I think that's one of the problems. I did a lot of stuff, and I did it
Yep.
all at the same time. Um,
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
so, I thank my lucky stars that that's the way I got steered, because I wouldn't want to be any other way.
The question is, are we just so fringe that nobody really cares except for the few people that care? What do you think about AI? Is it the end of art and all original thought? Is this the end of America?
Man, that is a really, really great question. AI scares me a little bit because I don't know that in 2 generations of being steeped in AI on our smartphones, that anybody downstream from us right now is going to be able to tell the difference between what's simply been manufactured and what is true. And so that is a real fear of mine
You
because my
know,
student, yeah,
no,
go ahead.
because they create stuff with AI, absolutely, right?
Yeah.
Well,
I got an AI paper that was perfect about a movie that I know by heart. And I had to pull the kid aside and say, what did you do? And he said, well, I ran it through one of those AI things to fix it. I said, well, here's the problem. All AI can do is scrub the internet for what sounds like it makes sense. I said, every one of the direct quotes that you have from the film was not in the film.
oh
It
wow,
sounds like something the character
wow.
would say, but it's not in the film. And I don't mean they were mangled quotes from the
No, I
film.
got it. I
They
got it.
were
They're
made up whole
completely
cloth.
invented.
Yeah.
Well, it's a scary world. You know, one of my best friends is a top physician in Los Angeles, and he told me that basically all the emails he does to, when patients ask questions are
Right.
AI. And
Yeah.
he's not, he's a very smart guy, very
Right.
original thinker. I mean, that's what it's come to. I think it's very dangerous, and I think it's the end of humankind. Let me ask you real quick, what do you think of the Catholic Church leadership? Is it going to get better, or is it finished as a dominant force for conservatism and morality?
It's got to get better. You would put me on the spot as a
Of course I
Catholic,
would.
but thankfully, as a Catholic, if you know Catholicism, you know that just because a pope says something doesn't mean that it's a reflection of what the true teaching of the church is. And so I pray for Pope Francis. Um, I do not agree with him. He is the product of a kind of liberation theology, which is an attempt to meld Catholicism with Marxism, which is impossible.
Of course, they're natural enemies.
They are natural enemies, and so his papacy has saddened me. He's a very careful speaker, though. In many cases, people have come up to me knowing that I know the church, say, well, what about this? He said this. And I said, well, technically, he didn't say anything that the church wouldn't agree with. When he said, like, who am I to judge about homosexuality? That's not incorrect. Okay. That's not.
Yes and no. I mean, if you look at
But,
verses, there's specific
well,
things against
if
homosexuality. I'm not talking about
you're
Catholic doctrine now. I'm talking about
right,
the Bible itself.
right. And Catholic doctrine, a lot of Protestants and Jews would probably be surprised to find out is based on the
We can
Bible.
argue about that, but that's for a
Right,
different
exactly.
show.
But no, I do think the church is suffering from a crisis in the elder generation because it was taken over in the 60s and the 70s.
You're talking about Vatican II?
Yes, after Vatican II, it opened the doors to a progressive movement, which then took a stranglehold over vocations to the priesthood, and it favored pro certain agendas. And these have
Absolutely.
been absolutely damaging to the church. But here's the thing, the pendulum always swings back. The younger generations crave. My son said this to me the other day. He said, Dad, I've gone to other churches and they just lack something. And I said, it's called form. And this is what I love about the Jewish faith. You go to synagogue and there is form.
Which is the reason why I
And
don't go, because I get bored with it, but I'm a
right,
simpleton.
right.
I'm not a spiritual man.
But even the Novus Ordo Mass, the Second Vatican Mass, the modern Mass, compared to the Latin Mass, doesn't have as much form, but it has form.
True.
And my son said that's exactly it. No other things I go to, they're all too loosey goosey. And I said, yeah. And I said, the other great thing about form is that I don't have to worry about the personal sanctity of the priest that's saying the Mass in front of me at all.
Interesting.
And
Interesting.
so, and that keeps me grounded. So yes, we are going through, look, collapses of civilization happen for very good reason. And usually it is because of human corruption
Mhm.
and sinfulness.
Well,
And, but those things run their courses and they are not powerful enough to completely obliterate everything.
I always make the comparison with today's Catholic Church with the Jewish temple in the time of Jesus. It was corrupt. It wasn't really following even Jewish law, and that's why,
Right.
in my opinion, if you look at Jesus as a man, which is what we have to do as Jews, he was a rebel. He was a
Right.
rebel against the system, much like
Yeah.
maybe you and I are.
Yeah.
Next question: do you trust Elon Musk?
I do now.
Hmm.
I do now.
Okay.
And
Well,
that is,
with X becoming a cesspool of corporate accounts which do nothing but regurgitate one another, is social media dead?
no, it's the battle of the algorithms, right?
Of course.
Every market opens up, and then everybody, like Russians trapped in the Soviet Union,
Mhm.
figure out how to take advantage of the holes and the chinks in the system. Um, and so I think that's what we're witnessing on X as well. It's a great place for free speech, but it's being taken over by the bots. It's being taken over by
Right.
the quoters. So
So let me ask you again: do you trust Elon Musk?
I think I do. At first, I wasn't sure.
Okay.
But now, do I agree with everything? I'm not sure, but the guy is as worried about our civilizational model as you are,
Oh,
and
absolutely,
and
absolutely. I agree with him.
literally wants to go to Mars to save the human
But
race.
the question is he a businessman first or is he an ethical human being? We don't know that, and I think that's kind of a slippery
Yeah,
slope.
and
Uh,
I don't have enough information to tell you. On the surface of it, I would say the former, because he's willing to put his own capital in. He's
True.
willing to push his own chips in, just like Trump. He's willing to lose money to do what's right. And so that gives me some pause. Unless that's a head fake, a billionaire's head fake, you know.
He is not stupid. And again,
Right.
I like a lot of what he said and done.
Yeah.
But I also see a pattern, and I know human nature, and money has always been a key for most people. Let me
Yeah.
ask you about Trump. Time is running short. Is Trump a temporary phenomenon, the likes of which we'll never see again? Do you see America after Trump with any of his legacy and coattails, or is he one and done?
I think there's coattails here. I think what's happening is now remember I made a distinction between the makers and the takers. Trump's a maker.
Yeah.
He is a guy, he might have inherited $1 million from his dad, but he turned it into $1 billion in the mobbed up real estate business in Manhattan and New Jersey. If you've never driven around with a land developer like I have, you don't understand what that takes.
Oh, yes.
How many wars and how many corrupt individuals in politics and in crime that you have got to satisfy in order to build a hotel. It's an amazing thing. And so when I realized he was serious about the presidency, I was like, oh, this guy's cut from a different kind of jib. And the elite in Europe and in the United States, in Manhattan and Los Angeles, they don't understand this guy. But as the guy standing behind you in your background is a testament to, they recognize the value of that and they try to capitalize on it
Mm.
without actually being it. And he's a guy that decided, all right, you'll take my checks, but you won't invite me to your country club. Well, then I'll just build my own golf courses and country clubs.
Which is
And
interesting because that's what, that's what Jewish people have always done. He's not Jewish,
yeah,
obviously. But that's what we did,
yeah,
They didn't invite us to their clubs. We built better clubs. He's the
exactly.
Rodney Dangerfield of presidents. But
Very good.
I will say this. I think there's a great humanity to this man that we don't see because of the bluster and because of I think he's actually a lot more sensitive than we realize, and that's why this I'm a tough guy kind of thing. I think he's
Yeah,
a great human being, and that's besides all these other achievements. Do you agree?
I would I would agree, and all of the anecdotal information about him actually supports that conclusion, because countless number of people who have worked for any Trump organization will tell you that he does not forget the little man. He knows everybody in his building's name.
Yeah.
He remembers everybody at Christmas. He truly appreciates the work that they do for his organization. And that simply is not the way most elite business men and women actually operate.
No,
Um,
he's an exceptional human being. Um,
yeah,
Gregory, Professor Borse, where do you
yes.
see yourself in the future?
Um, Probably right where I am. We were joking about that the other day. I just turned 60,
Oh,
right?
Mazel tov. Congratulations. You don't look a day over 40.
Yeah. So yeah, 60 is the new 40. I've been blessed with good genes because I come from a very motley crew in my gene pool. But you know, we were talking about retirement, and I said, my plan is to drop dead in front of my students in some comical way. And I can't imagine not doing what I'm doing now. You know what I mean? Shifting gears, because
Amen.
I've seen so many old people who work so hard to get to the point where they can finally retire, and retirement kills them.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, no, I'm not going to do that.
Well, I've retired at 45 and it hasn't killed me yet, but I do get very bored. Okay, we covered a lot of territory today and we're starting to run out of time. What do you have any final words for the audience of the AJ Steele show?
I would encourage you guys to pay attention to the generations that are coming up. And I'll share with you one of what I believe is one of my only wisdoms from all of my years of teaching. The next generation has already always solved the problems that its parents are still bickering about. So pay attention to the way their take on these cultural wars are. And I'm telling you that after say the millennials, you begin to see the shoulder shrugs, like they're done. The
Hmm.
wokeism, the girls playing, men playing in women's sports, like the next generation, they're already done with that. They're already like, and it's not like when we were arguing about gay marriage, AJ, the middle schoolers, next generation were like, meh, you know what I mean? Meh. With the wokeism that has infected all of this stuff, the next generation is actually, do you know what Gen Z says DEI stands for? Didn't earn it. That's their coinage.
Wow. Well,
So it's over. Do
well,
you see what I mean?
you know what they say, from your lips to God's ears. I hope you're right.
Yes.
I don't know if you are, but I really hope you are. Um, Professor Gregory Borse, thank you so much for coming on the AJ Steele show.
Thank you.
I wish you all the health and all the happiness in this world, and I hope you know that I truly appreciate your friendship.
Well, it's absolutely mutual. I cannot believe that we ended up running into each other. I joke about it, but I want to wish you the same.
Thank you.
And I want to tell you what a true honor it is for you to have me on your show. And anytime you want me to come back, I'm happy to do it.
Well, the honor is all mine.